This is the Bead Study Group recap of the first 10 meetings, and I will be recording this for sharing with folks who weren't able to make the meeting. Are we seeing today's agenda?
Yes.
Excellent. So I'll go over a little bit who we are and how we got started, the conservation concerns for beadwork. I will summarize the first 10 meetings. We will think maybe about some next meetings and future treatment approaches, perhaps aiming for a 2028 bead exhibit. I'm coming to you from the Alaska State Museum in Juneau. We are part of the Department of Education and Early Development, and in the Division of Libraries, Archives, and Museums. This is on Tlingit Ani, Tlingit land of the Aquan people, and Juneau is known as Zantakahini. The deed mission is an excellent education for every child every day, and at the museum, we really cater to lifelong learners. So we are um, looking to provide content and service to kids and adults and all Alaskans. Our museum core values are collaboration, service, and synergy. And on the left, we see I'm in the blue sweater there, and my intern Devin Lee from 2024, who did some analysis for us. And then on the right is Adriana Botello Alvarez, who's like my partner and supporter in this Bead Study Group, and she is the curator of collections access here at the Alaska State Museum. This project, I think, got going with J.K. Goodbear, who was an intern here in the summer of 2022. And at the time, she was working in the conservation lab of the Field Museum in Chicago and considering grad school options, perhaps in conservation. J.K. is now with the Mellon Foundation, and she is a beader. She beads regalia and powwow items, sneakers, all these amazing beadwork things. And she said, um, beads sometimes fade. And I'd never heard this before. And she said, yeah, pinks and purples especially can fade with light exposure. And I was really surprised. And she said, yeah, you're basically the first museum person who believed me when I said this. So that really got us thinking. And of our conservation concerns with beadwork, there's three of them that I'll mention. And this first one is color damage. So you'll see on the moccasin on the far left of your screen, the flower has some beadwork in it that should be pink. You can see on the right moccasin that it's pink, and there has been light damage to these moccasins in the museum collection. And we bought some new pink beads that we put some up in the window, and sure enough, right away, we saw this fading that you see on the right. Also in museums, when beads are grimy or soiled, the typical museum cleaning for beads like you're seeing on the left would be to take a cotton swab, lightly dampened with ethanol and water, and remove that grime. But on the right, you'll see that little vial with the pink liquid. That's our ethanol and water cleaning solution. And these new bugle beads we got from the store, and you'll see the pink was coming right off. So in more contemporary beads, there's a lot of coatings and dyes that manufacturers will sometimes put on beads to get a really wide range of colors, and those are pretty vulnerable. There's also sometimes painted cores in the inside of the bead's hole that are vulnerable to color change. Another thing that really got us going, I'll kind of go in chronological order here, was our state museum branch in Sitka, the Sheldon Jackson Museum, had a grant from Museums Alaska and the Rasmussen Foundation to bring Chuna McIntyre to look at Yupik beadwork in the collection there. Chuna is a master artist, a regalia maker, dancer, beader, culture bearer. It was really wonderful that he was willing to come. And one of the first things that he brought were these little beads in this container as an offering for the ancestors. So there was a great richness of things that he was sharing with us about Yupik beadwork. You'll see too on the left, Chuna is learning how to test beads for crizzling, which is another conservation concern, which sometimes you hear it called bead disease, but that's a misleading term, and beaders tend to prefer the term crizzling. and this is a mistake in the recipe of the glass when it was first made. And the alkaline component of the glass mixture will leach out to the surface as these kind of crystalline, salty, alkaline deposits. They look kind of sugary, sometimes they look sort of hazy, and this destabilizes the glass and makes it weak, and eventually those beads crack and break. So on the left, you'll see the little pH testing papers. When you get them in a box, they look kind of like this, and you dampen them lightly and you press them to the surface of the glass, and it tells you how acidic or how alkaline the beads are. And if they come out dark blue like this, it means they're really alkaline and you probably got bead disease. So um, the color damage issues beaders seem to know about, but museums don't really know about. Museums know about this crizzling thing, but beaders don't tend to know about it. So we do have this two-way learning and sharing that's going on. Also in 2024, a grant brought Sarah Knutson to the Alaska State Museum in Juneau from Fort Yukon, and she was studying Danae Athabaskan beadwork. And you see on the right, she was sharing with us some of her beadwork, some of her beading techniques, her two needle technique, which is a lot harder to do than it looked when she was showing us. She also brought a large wall pocket that had been, or set of 5 wall pockets, I think, that had been made by her great grandmother. And it was very old and it had some damage. And we asked her if she was going to repair it. And she said, no, uh, the artist, my great grandmother, didn't give me permission. And even though she's my ancestor, I'm a beater, same culture. If the original artist doesn't give you permission, you can't interfere with their work. So this was surprising to us because Chuna had mentioned, we'll get into these attachment issues, that the Yupik beadwork that was missing things needed to be restored, that in um, Yupik view of these museum items, it was important for ancestors and Yupik people to see things whole for them to be proper. And he was telling us a lot of the Yupik words for fix it, make it new, make it good. Asichluku, for example, was a word. He was telling us the Yupik words for fixing things. So these were showing us in the museum that there's a spectrum of um, approaches to whether or not you should repair things or not. And we feel like we have a lot to learn yet about these values and approaches, and we need to listen more about this. But these attachment issues, which is kind of the third condition concern we're thinking about, happens when beads are falling from the surface or becoming loose or having these troubles. And on the left, you'll see a wall pocket where the trim, this kind of shattered silk trim, is falling apart, and therefore the beads that are sewn to it are also falling off. And on the right, we see a doll, the belt on a beaded doll that has had pretty intense insect damage. And so we've lost the K in Alaska on that item. We see these kinds of vulnerabilities in our collection as well. In summer 2024, after these insights from Chuna and from Sarah, we had 2 interns come, 2 graduate students studying museum conservation, and they helped us do a pilot survey on these condition concerns. So Cheyenne Caraway came from UCLA Getty Museum, and Devin Lee came from New York University. And then through their efforts, and together with J.K. Goodbear, who first alerted us to the color damage issue, and her sister, we were able to present a poster at the American Institute for Conservation conference in Minneapolis. And so I'm grateful to Devin for putting the poster together and being there in Minneapolis for this talk. And it was sort of our first attempt to try to alert other museums that have beadwork as to these color damage concerns that JK first alerted us to. So the first 10 Bead Study Group meetings. The first 3 were kind of preliminary meetings to kind of bring some things out and talk to people about where we should go with the bead study. And then the next 7 were themed meetings. So the themes were dolls, trade beads and jewelry, seaweed patterns and octopus bags, fabrics, Danae Athabaskan Part 1, we've got a lot of Athabaskan material, containers, and finally garments and robes. We would meet one Saturday a month, including sort of a show and tell of personal collections or beading projects. And we would start out with refreshments and sharing these things in the classroom of the museum. And then we would move across the hall and have time with beaded items from the museum collection in the conservation lab there across the hall that Adriana and I would pull maybe a few dozen items from collections that we could look at more closely in the lab. The first preliminary meeting had just a couple people who'd already come in previously to look at um, beads in the collection, as well as Lyanna Wallace, who had helped us get the Chilcat Dye project going back in 2018. And so it was nice for her to be there and kind of help us get this one going too. This was one of the items that we'd looked at, this Thunderbird by Anna Katzik. So we were starting to look at designs and color choices, and we were lucky to be able to flip it over and see her stitching technique on the back. A few of the other things that we had talked about is the importance of the access to collections, the show and tell from beaders, establishing a common vocabulary, some of the motivations beaders have for what they do, the research interests of beaders. We were hearing people wanted to hear about old patterns and their stories, clues to dating and identification of beadwork. There was some presentation of our bead survey project, talking about museum care of beaded items, and maybe connecting to other groups. We continued this kind of brainstorming in the second preliminary meeting, which had a different mix of people, but again, real small, and we brought out a wide variety of items to stimulate discussion. That included things like categories of the collection, the way museums group things and store things. It was becoming clear is really different than how beaders think about things and look at things. And so that was going to influence how we were thinking about our bead meeting themes. Patterns and designs, fabrics. Beaders were, although I was like, let's look at glass beads. Beaders were like, well, we're interested in things that came before or alongside or instead of glass beads, like buttons and shells and quill work and that sort of thing. Talking about techniques and talking a bit about glass technology. The third preliminary meeting also had a range of items to kind of jointly brainstorm things. And we kind of talked a little bit about these um, dance sashas that are used in Huna. I think the word kugena is a word that I hear associated with these. And there were some images online. You can see the image on the right of the seagull ladies or the sea pigeon women. So this was kind of giving us a glimpse of how many different um, aspects of beadwork that beaders were into. We also talked about collaborative projects, beading and healing, pricing in the art market, and historic techniques of beaded items. With bead study number 4, we started with themes, and the doll theme was because Laura Revels is hoping for a revitalization of Tlingit doll making. And because we got a theme, we also invited doll artist Mary Ellen Frank to come in, and she brought in some of her dolls and her doll making supplies. So we really talked about those kinds of techniques. We looked at items like these really sweet, teeny tiny little dolls that are were made by Nancy Jackson that are in the museum collection. Laura was studying and taking notes on specific dolls, like this early 20th century Tlingit doll wearing a button blanket. And then in the sort of show and tell aspect, Juno Diedrichson brought in this small bag. It's less than a foot square and possibly a hunting bag, but it had originally belonged to Bob Kirkman of Sitka. And Juno brought it in the hopes that we could help him understand what are the designs on this bag. And it's been in the window of the conservation lab ever since, and we're kind of gathering clues to what this might be because it doesn't really look like the other beadwork that we've seen in the museum collection. Other things we talked about were the evolution of the doll market, known doll makers, 1980s era beading in the schools. Apparently, there was an initiative called Johnson O'Malley where there was beading that was taught in the schools. There were these items that were brought in for discussion, and of course, also Mary Ellen Frank's doll making techniques. Bead study number 5 was about trade beads and jewelry, and we were blessed with Florence Marks Shakely appearing at our meeting. This was really exciting for us, and we were able to look at items she's made and also that her mother, Emma Marks, made. Emma Marks has many things in the museum collection here. And Florence has been a mentor to many beaders, and this was giving us an understanding kind of this intergenerational connection and passing on of knowledge and beadwork. We were looking a lot of trade beads in the museum collection, and we hope to understand these better and what beaders are interested in about these. We were also talking about the earring phenomenon. There's been a real boom recently in beaded earrings we see on the art market, and that people wear a lot of beaded earrings nowadays. But we were surprised that there are really very few earrings in the Alaska State Museum collection. There are some Yupik ear hooks, and then occasionally something like this item here, which is some trade beads on ear, like more contemporary ear hooks by Doris Akeya of Gamble on St. Lawrence Island. These earrings are from the 1970s. And then on the right are a couple of earrings that are in private collections that we think are made by Cass Pook out of Sitka, of like these really tiny antique beads. But the discussion of earrings was something we talked about. Here we see on the left some hair ornaments, beaded hair ornaments from St. Lawrence Island, and on the right, a variety of Dene Athabascan dentalium necklaces. Here's a mystery item that is also made of dentalium. The museum database seems to think it's Northwest Coast, but we really don't understand this item, what it is, how it might have been worn or used. It apparently came into the collection in the 1950s, but it's a bit of a mystery to us. So in addition to Florence Marks Shakely joining us and talking about kind of family legacies of beading, we started to get a glimpse that maybe Yakutat seems to be a beading powerhouse, and it made us think about what other communities might have strong beading legacies. We had a bit of a discussion about gender in beading, changes in the art market, and talking a little bit about bead types, beads with painted cores, charlottes, trade beads, and that sort of thing. The speed study number 6 was about seaweeds and octopus bags. And there's so much interest in the seaweed patterns that I think our next meeting in November might be seaweeds part 2. There's a lot of richness there, and it hasn't necessarily been well explored and published, these seaweed designs. We were also seeing that when you bring items out, they aren't just in conversation with us, but they seem to be in conversation with each other too, and are telling us things in of items that are related to each other. These items really seem to be connected in their um, beads, their colors, their beading techniques, the materials that are used. On the right, there is this little pouch that you see the two sides, and it's really great to see how the symmetries are playing out in the bead designs. And then I'll ask you to look here at this item in the middle of the bag. And what I think we see there, I always thought those were flowers, but it seems that perhaps they're blooming seaweeds. And we see this motif in other things in the collection, like these moccasins have it on the toe, and this bag or wall pocket has what might even be from the same pattern, like really similar design. Here we see a shape that appears on some northern Tlingit items um, that shows up on wall pouches, a tunic, it shows up on octopus bags, and we're wondering what that might be. Could it be a sea cucumber? Um, what is this? And it could help us attribute things and identify things. Here's a few octopus bags from the collection, and octopus bags are a form of regalia that are still actively made by many beaders, and they're interesting for beaders to look at their construction and the different approaches artists have taken. The one here with the, I think it's a raven with a heart, has only 6 tabs instead of the usual 8 tabs of octopus bags, so that kind of was exciting for folks to see. Other things we talked about that meeting were designs and ownership, synergy that beadwork might have with other art forms, how beaders learn how to bead, information that might be in old photographs, and we started to talk about a future bead exhibit. And now the future bead exhibit, we're looking at maybe 2028 because it would be nice to have it happen in a year that we have celebration. But this coming year, this coming summer, 2026 is way too soon. So that's why we're kind of looking out towards 2028. Bead study number 7 was about fabrics, and this was a request from Trip Kraus, who is very interested in floral fabrics and floral fabric patterns that show up in backings and linings and whatnot that might influence beading designs. Tripp is also very interested in the way beaded bags have come across the North American continent from further east. Fire bags, bandolier bags, hunting bags, all these different bag types that eventually hit the coast and we see octopus bags sort of. Is there this evolution in bag types? And this is something that it seems like resonates with a lot of other artists who are also interested in this research topic. So you'll really see when we started paying attention to the fabrics, which again wasn't on our radar at the beginning, but is an interest of beaders. We were seeing some really interesting fabrics, really intentional choices on the part of the artists, design and intent in what kind of fabrics were chosen for these kind of hidden away areas. This item, speaking of hidden away, is a ammunition bag from around 1900. It's thought to be Tlingit or Athabascan. And inside this pocket here that opens up, there is a fragment of a chilcat weaving. It's maybe 8 by 10 inches, and it's completely embedded and sewn inside of this bag, which is a little bit excruciating because I think people are really interested in what's on this chilcat weaving that's deep inside this bag. We also see this cotton that has this teeny tiny printed pattern. And this is a fabric, a cotton print that we see often with these tiny patterns, sometimes little animal heads or other things. And then the design here on the um, flap of the pouch is a shape that we're wondering is if that's related to the seaweed designs. And particularly, we wonder if that might be related to the egg cases of skates and rays. Apparently, the egg case that Adriana and I found on the beach at low tide is a long nose skate egg pouch. Um, and when we went tide pooling at low tide in the spring in Juneau, we were really seeing that the seaweeds we have here in Juneau are different than the seaweeds you might see in Sitka. So there's biological information that we could connect up to that might be interesting to beaders. And we were looking at older fabrics, like people talk about broadcloth, Stroud, Melton, um, all these different early woolens that were used and beaded on. And for example, we'll see on this old button robe some very old woolen textiles. And on the right, because we see a lot of insect damage, you'll see that these older woolen fabrics that were woven and then shrunk down to make them really tight and strong. And then there's distressing that happens that naps the surface so that sometimes visually these kinds of fabrics look like felt. But if you have insect damage that nibbles away that nap on the surface, you'll see that they're woven. So there's information there for us. And we were also able to interface with this group of folks who were on a cruise ship this summer. These are the Quilt Addicts Anonymous, and they came in and they were looking at some quilts in the um, collection. And then a local quilter here in Juneau, Julie Coghill, who's also a librarian, she turned us on to these books, which help us to date fabrics, which maybe if we could look at these fabrics and how old they are, it might give us a sense of some more clues about the items in the collection that have cotton fabrics. So this fabric meeting also talked about beading supplies, trims and edges, other substrates like sealskin, leather, and velvet, fungal felt. This is a new thing for us. There are these mycelial mats that will grow in like hemlock um, trees that are like leather-like material that sometimes is beaded on. There are a couple museums, not us, unfortunately, but a couple of museums have examples of um, beadwork from Ketchikan that was done on fungal felt. Deer hooves came up as a side quest. We have a number of beaded items that also have deer hooves in them, and then some fabric vocabulary we got talking about. Bead study number 8 was Danae Athabaskan part one. Part one because we know there's a lot more Athabaskan items to bring out. We were looking at things like Athabaskan florals and plants that maybe have relationships with the seaweed patterns we see. It's a ripe area for research. Beaters were especially interested in that migration of the bags from further east as the designs came across the continent. Here we see a pair of moccasins that have what beaters were calling silk satin beads, which have this real shimmery look to them. Notice we're seeing some pinks here. On the left, we see what these silk satin beads look like magnified. And the reason they have this satiny look is they have these really tiny, tiny, long, narrow air holes in them. But that also means that the cut ends of the beads can be sharp. And so beaders know that if you're using silk satins, you got to be careful where you use them because they might abrade your thread. There's other kinds of beads that beaders also know can cause um, rubbing and damage to threads. So that's been an interesting thing that wasn't on our radar. And then on the right, you'll see a picture of those moccasins photographed under UV light. And you'll see that those pink beads fluoresce bright orange under UV light, which is a clue to us that they might have a dye or a coating. So it might be that looking at our collection with UV light might give us a clue what beads might be vulnerable to color damage. Here are a couple more Athabascan beaded items. Beading on leather and velvet is things we especially see on these items. You'll see on the little detail, we'll see metal beads, faceted metal beads. And the little forget-me-not flower has these petals that are 3D. They kind of stick up. There's like a loop, but it's not fully stitched down. So that's another thing that we were seeing on these. And we were grateful to Jennifer Williams for sending us silverberries, which I didn't know what these were until really recently. And we don't have anything in the museum collection here that features silverberries, but apparently these were a precursor of glass beads. And this was kind of an older bead technique. And the folks in the interior all seem to know about silverberries, and we were excited to get our hands on some. So grateful to Jennifer Williams for that. Also during this meeting, Joyce Roberts, who's a Gwich'in beater, was here as part of a Access to Alaska Native Collections grant. And Megan Smetzer was here, which people might know her for her award-winning book, Painful Beauty, about Tlingit women, beadwork, and the art of resilience. Beaters really appreciate this book, so that's exciting that she was able to come to one of our meetings. The beaters were again talking about changes over different regions, migrations, the using of like paper backings or labels, or not labels, layers in order to control the tension and how tight the beadwork is. And people started talking about maybe we should have meetings in other towns. Bead study number 9 was about containers. So we had examples from all across Alaska of different kinds of beaded containers. Here we see on the left mesh bags or babiche bags, they're sometimes called. We've got about a half a dozen of those in the collection, and they tend to have some really old beads, including some beads that have bead disease and are breaking. And then on the right, there's a detail from a grease dish that has inlaid beads. It's a wooden dish and it has beads inlaid around the edge. And judging from how excited some of our Bead Study Group members got about this, it makes me think that maybe this technique isn't used a whole lot anymore. And there might be revitalization of that sort of artistic method. Here are some other beaded containers where the beads are not sewn down to the surface, but more like woven over the surface. So woven bead techniques, loomed bead techniques. Some of the items are like glass bottles. There's even a light bulb that was beaded on. So this was kind of going in a different technique direction. There's on the left is a birch bark basket where beads have been attached into the rim, and on the right, a beaded box from St. Lawrence Island. Apparently, Lucille Cusada from Gamble in the 1970s made a lot of these sorts of baskets. So I'm not clear if these are specific to her and her family or if it's more of a St. Lawrence Island style beading. This image I show you on the left here is a bead from one of those babiche bags. And a lot of beaders know about white heart beads. These are sometimes they're called cornaline d'Aleppo. They're kind of a bead that has a opaque white middle and then there's red over the top. These are a really popular kind of a trade bead that are like they're still made today. But apparently there's a real old version of these that has a translucent green core with red over the top. And I was surprised to see one of those on that bag. So that was kind of exciting. Also, during this containers meeting, people were talking about um, these thoughts of whether things should be repaired or not repaired, talking about what are some more indigenous ideas of repairing, talking about replicas and reproductions of things, talking about investing in living artists as opposed to just investing and fixing on like the old things in museum collections. And there was some discussion about maybe we should, during the meetings, instead of seeing lots and lots of stuff, maybe we should see fewer items, but dig deeper and focus more on each item. And finally, bead study number 10, we were looking at garments and robes. So we did look at fewer items here just because some of them were so big. Like we had a stack of robes with sheets in between that we were unstacking and all looking at together. We were also looking at this outfit of like a tunic and these leggings that we were sort of surprised that they went together because the beading is pretty different on both the front and back of the tunic, as well as the difference in the bead work and the color choices between the tunic and the leggings. The tunic went out not long ago for a ceremonial use at a kuik, so there's definitely been interest in this outfit. We also saw a lot of things during this meeting that had clan crests. On the left is a wolf on a button robe made by Mary King. And on the right, there's a frog emerging from its den on a tunic that's by Lillian Hammond. And when we uncovered this tunic, everyone went, oh, and everybody started to refer to it as the sweet frog. So there was definitely a reaction to that. With frogs and toads, it kind of we got a whole conversation about frogs and toads as crests, and there's when we're looking at crests, there's a lot of things to be careful of, and so we started talking about cautions with crests. There was discussion about responsibilities of balance in Tlingit beadwork and about opposites holding information, particularly about stories that might not belong to the opposite, but they have to know what they are in order to be commissioned to do the work. So there was some discussion about those kinds of things. There was talk about making art as a social practice, as something that you do maybe with other people and not always doing your artwork alone or in isolation. So that was an interesting um, conversation that was going on. And then we talked a little bit about ideas for interview approaches, both for if we were going to interview folks for content for an eventual exhibit, but also to better document the collection. So the Alaska State Museum in Juneau has over 800 beaded items. About a third of those are Yupik and Nupiaq items. We've got here what we call our Eskimo problem that we don't always know which items are Yupik or Inupiaq or St. Lawrence Island Yupik. Some of those things are just poorly identified in our database, which, since the collection goes back to 1900, things were real different when things came into the collection. So, but about a third of the things are Yupik or Nupiaq. This includes hunting items and fishing items, things that might only have like one bead. So that was kind of interesting. There's about a quarter of the collection that's Northwest Coast. Most of that's Tlingit. About a quarter of the collection is Dene Athabascan, and the remainder of the beaded collection is Unangach, Lutuksukpiaq, non-native, or we just don't know. There was also, in looking at this and having these meetings, maybe 500 of the 800 items we might say are beadwork. They have a lot of beads, and there's a certain amount of skill and technique about how they're applied to the item. Or then there's maybe 300 items in the collection that we're kind of saying have beads. So these are things like a fishing lure that might only have one or two beads on the fishing lure, things like that. The breakdown is similar at the Sheldon Jackson Museum in Sitka in terms of the cultures represented and the distribution of things, but we haven't yet done a deep dive into that collection with the exception of meeting with Chuna McIntyre, which was amazing. So we've seen in these first 10 meetings about half, maybe a little less than half of the beaded items at the Alaska State Museum. And yet to see are some of these sorts of things. So adorned tools like hunting and fishing gear and sewing kits, those kinds of things, amulets and ornaments, tourist and art market items, wood and ivory carvings that are inlaid with beads, wall pockets and pouches, footwear, moccasins, mucklucks, gloves and mitts. There's quite a bit of those, footwear and handwear, I guess you would say, and more Danae at the basket items like pillow covers and baby carriers. So a few examples of these things. There's a really amazing Yupik headdress on the left, which needs to be looked at more. On the right, there's this beaded Bible cover that is from the interior. I was fascinated to see that there was one beaded Bible cover at AFN for sale at in the artist market. That was fascinating. On the left here, we're seeing a beaded tunic that seems to be beaded with a bear. It's a Northwest Coast item, and the beads you can't see great in this picture, but they're bugle beads. And this outline in white is also seen in other museum collections using dentalia shell. So I think we've got a good conversation coming with that item. On the right, we see a little bear on a tourist item. There's quite a bit of things made for the tourist market in the museum we haven't looked at. And then here are some items that are a little bit harder to place. These high heels that are made from what might be deer hide maybe, with quill work and beads. In the middle, we have a loomed piece. It's like a watch fob that we don't know if that's native made or not. And then the far right, these are old rosary beads. So this is my last slide. We've got some future meetings. We can decide some new themes. I am grateful for any feedback or corrections people want to give to me in any format you care to give them. My email's here if you want to write to me, for example. I'd love to know people's research passions, future themes, public programs, what we should think about for a 2028 bead exhibit. And hopefully I didn't bore you too much, but there were some great pictures, yeah? Uh, Adriana, did you see anything in the chat or there's not a whole lot of folks on right now, but
Yeah, nothing new in the chat. We got that article that Judy shared about the Lenabe bags, but no
excellent.
additional questions in the chat. But I think we can open it up if anybody wants to add some comments or questions.
I just have to say, I wish I could have attended so many more of these meetings because it's just it's so rich in the work that you guys are doing. I'm just like, my mind is going crazy with, all of the things beyond what I was able to talk about in my book, which is just such a small fraction. So I'm really grateful to all of you for doing this really important work for the community. I think it's fabulous.
Megan, are you able to tell us, are you still researching bead stuff? Is this still an active area for you?
I would love to keep on it. Right now I'm doing other kinds of projects, but I'm working with Shken George right now in her upcoming show, and so that's really been fun. So there's beadwork in that, along with
Hmm.
weaving, applique, and everything else. But yeah, I would love to, I'd love to contribute in any way I can because I just, this is a passion of mine is beadwork, and I am really drawn to the identification of the patterns, which I think is so amazing. And that's, the only thing I was able to identify was, seaweed as opposed to floral. And so to find actually very specific examples, I think is great.
Are you thinking of coming for Celebration 2026?
I hope so. Yes. Yeah.
Mhm.
check in on my dad, and I would love to be there for celebrations. So yeah. I'm actually working on a project with Catherine Bunn-Marcuse at University of Washington, which is we are doing right now an edited volume on women's arts on the Northwest Coast. And so we've got a bunch of folks who are interested in writing about very specific things that are happening all up and down the coast from Washington to Alaska. And so, we are talking about possibly trying to gather folks maybe around celebration to talk about what are some of the issues that people in community are really concerned about when it comes to thinking about women's arts. So I'm just putting that out there. I don't know if we're going to manage to pull that off, but you know, the kind of discussions that are happening around beadwork, I think,
Yeah.
immediately intersect with kind of the big picture we're trying to pull together. So
Excellent.
Yeah, I'd be interested in seeing what's in other museums like in BC and international, and scrolling around on the British Museum. They had some really beautiful blankets on their website. I've been working with EAC on the Berlin collection. We've been meeting on the Berlin collection, and it's be interesting to also, look at some of those old beaded. Before they got beads, they had to use the shells and other things. So I've see if there's any more old collections with the shells on hides.
Mhm.
They're kind of pretty rare, but I think they're out there. We just got to track them down. 'Cause
Yeah.
I've read about them. We've read about them, how they use the shells and stuff on hides, which before they got beads.
Hmm.
the NMAI in Washington has an extensive collection of Tlingit beadwork, and a lot of it is online.
Yeah,
European museums don't seem to have quite as much. Just that was not something that was being collected necessarily, as far as I know.
yeah.
Wow.
I was hoping to see when I was in Helsinki that collection, but they were renovating, couldn't see it. And then, of course, can't get into the Kumstaff anymore.
So there's a kind of a small group of us today for this bead meeting, and the times that we've tried to Zoom any of our bead meetings, we have also not attracted folks. So um, I'm kind of thinking still how to be inclusive and draw people in who can't be in Juneau. In September, our museum is hosting the Museums Alaska meeting, and I'm thinking it might be smart for us to try to have one of our Bead Study Group meetings happen during that conference, that we could at least catch some museum folks from around the state who might then uh, think about what's in their collections and beaters in their communities, perhaps. But if others have ideas about how to be more statewide or broader in how we collaborate, like I'm all ears.
Yeah, see if tribes have cultural departments. They could reach out to, because a lot of them, they provide the supplies for them to make the blankets or moccasins for their sponsor classes, and then find who like I just know in Yakutat, when I lived there, Jenny Wheeler taught the moccasin class and the octopus class. And so she's be well to reach out to the tribal culture departments, JOMs, that sponsor classes.
Good idea. I can't stop writing things down, even though this is recorded.
Are you planning on doing something around celebration time?
Yes.
Okay.
I'm not quite sure exactly what. I will say I'm hoping to have 2 interns next summer, one of them from the conservation world and one of them from the beading world, that I'm going to ask to work together this summer. And I have funding for that. I have to figure out how that's all going to come together. But I am hoping to have some sort of a um, meeting or a discussion about our project together during celebration.
And just thinking about the bead exhibit, which I think is a great idea, is it going to be kind of, I mean, obviously it's going to be in discussion, but bringing in that conservation lens, then, I think bringing in all the different perspectives on the work, historical, community, conservation.
Yes, I'm hoping that my vision, the core vision for this exhibit would be that uh Alaska Native beater would walk into that gallery and be like, ah, this is for me, right? And so I'm hoping that the Bead Study Group helps guide what the themes are, what kind of objects are must-have items from the collection to be in there. There's some talk about there being a display of contemporary earrings because that is such a uh, strength of the beading world right now. And there's a way that the previous collaborations we've done on, say, Chilkat dyes or gut practices, we're looking at art forms that were pretty esoteric and that not very many people do anymore. But beads is very different, right? It's huge. It's an easy thing for people to get into. It's in all the Alaska Native cultures, and it's there's so many directions to go in that you need guidance, I think, from the beaters to say what are the themes, what stories should we be telling, and what should we be looking at. But as the conservator at the museum, I'm responsible for trying to make things last for 500 years. So I'll definitely be bringing in some materials technologies like deterioration concerns, like that sort of stuff. But as in previous exhibits, we'll probably keep that like a little vignette and not like certainly not dominate the exhibit.
There was an exhibition at the Bill Reed Gallery here in Vancouver a few years ago about beadwork. And they did a wall of earrings.
Really?
Yeah, they had like 50 different artists, and they hung all of their earrings on a wall behind some plexi. And so that was pretty cool. I didn't think it was the best way to display the earrings, but it was really cool that they were able to, gather so many from up and down the coast and into the interior a little bit
Yeah.
of BC, and did that. So it's something that is absolutely, I think a great way to kind of nod to this really important thing that's happening right now. My mom is so
Yeah.
funny. She used to go to all of the events in Fairbanks, and she's been a bead collector for years and years and years. And she's said to me in recent years, I just don't, they're just not doing the beadwork anymore. And I'm like, Mom, you have to go look at Instagram. That's where they all are. And then I know that's changing again. Like AFN has great beaders and that sort of thing. But there was a period of time where she said, I just don't see the beaders selling at all of the events.
Wow.
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah. So
Yeah,
she's, go ahead.
my son brought back from AFN some huge beaded owl earrings for me. They're like that big. Yeah, I got it downstairs, but it's a really, really huge beaded owls because I'm from the owl house.
Ah,
I'll
well,
get pictures and send it. It's really gorgeous. Yeah.
that would be cool. Do you know who made them?
Yeah, I think the name's on the card.
Oh, that'd be cool to know.
Yeah, it's really
Yeah,
good.
the size of the earrings too. Like sometimes there are these big earrings people call collar dusters or something, collarbone dusters, or some of the really big ones people call auntie earrings. They'll say, "Oh, that has big auntie energy." So there's definitely stuff going on around those earrings.
Mm.
Yeah, you gotta limit the time you're wearing them because they get pretty heavy.
And it's interesting, I know in like the Yukon, there's some beaters up there, and they've kind of started with beading, and now they're launching into fashion more widely. You know, it's kind of a gateway into becoming a fashion designer. There's a lot of support for that right now in Canada. And so, you know,
Wow.
just the imagination of taking, you know, these amazing patterns, floral patterns primarily, and starting with earrings and then translating into just a really, you know, revisiting fashion through an Indigenous lens. It's pretty cool.
Okay, that reminds me in your book, Megan, when there are those dresses that Lily Hope was making that were like octopus bag dresses. Yeah?
I know. I love those
So
so much.
cool.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, there was a Canadian lady that I got some she had a Chilkat design dresses,
Mhm.
and I ordered some from her. Um and I was meeting with IAIA. They had a meeting to re-sign our collaborative agreement, and I was telling them we don't have the monies for a regalia instructor on campus. So she says, well, IAIA is doing some fashion design classes. And so maybe we could do a collaboration to bring that instructors. We got to find the money to do some classes here. If we can find money to do that exchange with IAIA and bring them to campus, that would be fun to have some fashion design classes.
That would be really cool. There was there's a lot of great beaded stuff in the White Horse, the McBride Museum in Whitehorse. I was over there a couple summers ago for the Attica Festival, which also included all kinds of classes and workshops for artists, including beading workshops. And I was going to try to go back last summer, and they'd canceled the festival. And I don't know if it's coming back, but the Attica Festival was amazing. And we got that border between the US and Canada, and there's so much richness that goes back and forth and so much more that could go back and forth, but we kind of have that border sometimes in our mind too.
Yeah, living in Canada as a, you know, expat Alaskan, it's really strangely impermeable. Certainly in a scholarly perspective, it's very hard to do kind of cross-border research, you know, find funding for that kind of thing. It's like, nope, you gotta, you know, it's gotta be Canadian focused or whatever. And so, I mean, it's not a physical border, but it certainly is one that has an impact. Absolutely.
Yeah.
So I don't know if you could see this picture, but my friend Dixie that was in that picture, she finished her fourth collar, beaded collar and leather. And I think she
This
wants
is
to do,
Dixie Deo.
yeah, and
Yeah.
she's gonna work on number 5 so she can go around and talk about these beaded collars that she's been beading. And they're
So cool.
beaded on leather, yeah.
Beautiful.
Yeah, that was I didn't talk about that one slide where she was in a picture with you and Patty Atkinson, but um once we pull all this stuff into the lab, those items are usually here for, a couple weeks. And so there's an opportunity for people who weren't able to come to the Saturday meeting to come in and look at things. And we should probably get that information out there better, that if you can't make the meeting, try to hop in anyway and see these items. Well, it would be nice too if we could try to get a slate of the next 6 months going, so that we could I mean, we won't do it at this meeting, obviously, but to kind of give a sense of where things are on the calendar and what kind of topics are coming up, and maybe could we take advantage of people who might be in town in order to be able to have them come, some of that sort of stuff. It can be really hard to plan too far ahead, but at least the next 6 months, maybe we could come up with some themes and meeting ideas. Any other thoughts before we wrap up today?
Yeah, no, it's been fun. Enjoyed it. Yeah.
I really
Thanks.
appreciate the overview and the plans for the future. I think it's an excellent project. It's great.
Awesome. So thank you all so much for being here. And there's my email. Like I said, I'll take feedback, however, and corrections. If I'm wrong on things or, I totally want to know. Please tell me. So thanks everybody, and we'll look forward to the next 10 meetings of the Bead Study Group.
Yeah, thanks, Ellen.
Yeah, thank you so much. Bye-bye.
Bye.